So welcome to ACMP Hong Kong. My name is Leon Lau. I'm the serving president for the ACMP, Association of Change Management Professionals, Hong Kong chapter. Richard Vernon, my co-presenter, is a director for the ACMP Hong Kong as well. We've both been involved in consultancy and a variety of professional services. I just want to take this opportunity to perhaps just briefly talk about ACMP Hong Kong just briefly. So we focus here, obviously focus on change management, but what we want to do is to broaden a bit to look at what seems to be the most useful thing for the current situation to reflect and to learn new skills and new ways of working. And we want to kickstart this particular year, although a bit cold year, to look at something that we have learned from 2020. And we focus on very much into looking at how do we do remote meetings. And I think by now, nobody is going to dispute the fact that we will be in this kind of environment. You can look at my lovely background and Richard's got a lovely background, talking to you in variety of time, not constrained by physicality, and really interacting and doing something that we used to do face-to-face, looking at camera, talking, and building relationships. So the new normal, it basically changes us and demands a different approach, right? That is a kind of the understatement of at any time. But really what I want to talk about and share with you today really is maybe 5 or 6 points about what we picked up. How do we deliver remote meetings? And one of the key things to talk through is we are really reapplying some of the things that you might already know when you're doing face-to-face in perhaps sometimes unexpected ways that you reapply in the online environment. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to introduce perhaps Richard Vernon once again, that Richard's been a consultant and got a colorful background and even in performing arts. And we work together and we enjoy kind of conversation. So the style of tonight will be kind of part webinar, part kind of conversations. We will follow our own medicine and we will not open for questions. You're very welcome to type in questions in the chat, but we'll perhaps take questions towards the end. So let me hand over to Richard for him to take us through the of tonight, and I'll join him interactively. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Leon. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Vernon. I've been in Hong Kong just about 10 years. Before I was in Hong Kong, I was an opera singer in Europe, you know, as is normal. And I've been working in IT, consulting and business, especially transformation and change at places like Jockey Club, West Kowloon, in Macau, doing various exciting things. And so tonight we're going to talk about practical tips, and we are big on practicality here. So this is not theoretical particularly, this is more about these things we thought they worked. So we're going to jump straight into the first one, which is about making it obvious. Now, making it obvious for us is about starting with the important information straight away, up front, not being subtle about it, following up by making the argument, and then following up afterwards by showing your evidence. So the classic Minto's pyramid starts with the conclusion, then develops the argument, then the evidence or data. Now, why would we do this? So the reason that we found this has been so effective in the past year is because many of our classic storytelling techniques of persuasion rely on us being in a room full of people where they have to listen to us, where if we talk for 30 minutes, they listen to us. And that isn't duplicated when we move online. So you have situations in webinars where it's really quite feasible that half of your audience has got one window open watching you, one window open doing some shopping, they've got half an ear out for the kids in the background, and attention levels aren't as high naturally. And classic storytelling techniques that we use in meetings, presentations, especially that we use in sales, they rely on that attention throughout. And that's questionable and often disrupted in a webinar environment. So that's why we take the opposite approach and we come in, first of all, this is why you should pay attention. This is why this deserves your time and your thought. here's our big conclusion. And then if you're interested in that, we'll show you how we got there. So the premise here is, unless you can guarantee continual attention, it is better to make your point obvious. Now, sometimes you're in a meeting with people who all know what the content is. They all know it's a very important meeting. Big things depend on it, and you're going to have their attention. So in that case, feel free to use storytelling methods as you're used to doing. But if you're in a situation where you don't know if the audience is paying attention, where you don't know how much they're going to take on, then we suggest you just make it obvious and don't be subtle. So this slide is showing that storytelling is about attention. So this just shows the idea of a story is, you start with the first point, and then you add the second point, and then you add the third point, and the fourth point, and the fifth point, and the sixth point. And then because of these things, you reach the big conclusion. So in this case, you reach X as a result of A, B, C, D, E, and F. They add up to X. And if someone follows you through that journey, it's a very powerful method of persuasion, especially if they come to that conclusion before you get there. Now, in a webinar, you don't know if people are listening to you at point A. You don't know if they hear the first thing you say and decide that that's not immediately relevant. And maybe the last thing you're going to say, the big X, is very relevant, but they don't know that. So it's a dangerous technique, equally because interruptions can happen. So if they've heard the first couple of things, they take a phone call, they go into the back room, they come back, they've missed a few things, and then you say, hey, and therefore this, and they missed it. So the question you should ask yourself when planning how to deliver a session is, are my audience going to see and hear enough for the conclusion to make sense? And if I'm not sure, then go in strong, deliver the conclusion, executive summary format, and then develop the evidence. So I'm going to ask Leon in a second, for his take on this especially. You'll notice that that's the way we're presenting each point during this webinar as well. We're practicing what we preach, or attempting to. So Leon, what's your thoughts on this one?
So one of the things that, in practical terms, I think we're going to come on to that, the fact that we are non-stop team Zoom all day, and it becomes very repetitive. And one of the things that people tend to, a kind of really difficult situation is when you don't have enough time to present your PowerPoints or whatever presentation. And the tendency is to try to go faster and squeeze the time. But this is actually the way around. And I think you have to think about it a bit more. It's not as intuitive as what used to be. Most professionals will follow a scientific way of explaining point by point to get the conclusion. This is actually the way around. So actually, it was let you say your piece first, and depending on the time that you have, then you elaborate on it. You make sure your big idea is communicated first. So that's the first one. The other point is about culture. If you look at some of the work being done by one of the INSEAD professor, she done a work on cultural map, and she got a really intriguing results. The fact that some cultures, now I'm grossly generalizing now, some cultures would prefer you to tell me the point first before we tell the reasons. Typically, and I say typically, the Americans, the Australians, interestingly, the Chinese as well, are very much into that kind of thinking. So tell me the point. But you need to be a bit careful about the French and the Germans, but that's another story for another time. But really, this is about getting the big idea across within the time you have, and be prepared to do that, and don't get caught because people are losing their attention. Back to you, Richard.
And Hong Kong's always the most interesting place for this, because if you have methodologies which really do have a cultural divide, regularly you'll find that maybe the finance department and the IT department are more local and more Chinese, and maybe there's lots of expats in some of the other departments, and you get this crossover, this divide, where the one size fits all brush is not very effective, and you really want to deliver differently to different audiences. And then you're just trying to manage that situation, especially when everyone's in the same group, and you're trying to find the way of communicating. But that's the challenge of delivery and change management, and it's sort of why it makes it so much fun. Okay, so that was point number one. Let's get straight onto number two. Number two is put it in the voice. So, following big idea format, put extra care and emphasis into how you speak. So what does that mean? That means use simple language, use action words when you can instead of concept words. And you're doing it because people in normal conversations rely heavily on physical cues, which means they judge you from the way you look, from the way you smile, from your eye movement, from your hand movement, from your face movement. And as humans, we do a lot of instant interpretation and evaluation based on what we're seeing. Now, when you enter this digital arena, you can't control if people are looking at you, and you can't control what size the picture is. So as of right now, I have no idea if some of you are watching this on a mobile phone where my slide is taking up most of the screen, my head might be, 1 inch square. And if that's the case, you can't see the physical cues I'm doing. Or maybe I'm full screen and the slide's very small. And if I use my hands, if I use my face very expressively like we're used to doing, then you can, but I can't control it. So because I can't control it, some of the physical cues that we use, such as things like mirroring, which we commonly use naturally, they just won't work. So this makes it harder for people to understand you. It takes more concentration. It's one of the factors that contributes to this thing we all know as Zoom fatigue. It takes more concentration for your brain to analyze and make a judgment on what it's perceiving. So what you can do to help with that is using your voice, you make yourself very obvious, make yourself easy to understand, reduce the levels of subtlety, which me being an Englishman, that's especially counterintuitive because we're all about saying things in a subtle way that makes it obvious to us what we intended just by a slight inflection. Don't do that. Just exaggerate, make it very clear, exaggerate emotion when necessary. So, Leon, what are your particular thoughts on how you use your voice more in meetings?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that from my experience, I have facilitated groups for many, many years. Now, when you facilitate groups in a face-to-face situation, there are certain things that you kind of put on extra. It might come across a bit over the top. However, when you do it online, you actually have to use the technique. So it's built on what you said about the voice. So you make it very explicit because people can't see your physicality. So what it means is like, let me see if I've understood what you said, Richard. Replay that, ask explicitly. You will never do that in a face-to-face situation because it just seems so over the top. While when you're online, you're really relying on the voice and relying the skill of how you play and use your voice. And in fact, in different situations, it will be called facilitation skills. So active listening, short words, short sentences, simpler than simple. I think the concept words is also when you use concept, people get very, very tired. So you use do, act, new, I. In another way, if you're into language, use Anglo-Saxon words. Don't use words which is French and Latin background because those are more complicated words. But that's another topic another time. Use simple words, use action words, and use facilitation techniques to help you. So instead of using your traditional face-to-face, and you're very used to it, and that's part of the problem.
And as with all of these things, if you haven't done it before and you think, okay, right, let's try this, it feels very strange. It does feel like you're artificially slowing down your words. It feels a bit like, how can this really make sense? I think this sounds a bit silly. I remember helping my brother once write a best man speech and practicing it, and he was going very, very quickly through the words. And I said, slow down, slow down. And he slowed down about 2% and said, oh, that's much too slow. And like, no, way, way, way slower. It does sound okay. It might feel a little unnatural when you start doing it, but overall, it's actually quite hard for people to even notice that you're doing it. They just hear you better. And then, you'll notice the bits where you don't do it because people sort of phase out a bit. So it's in line with the first point. It's make it obvious, but this time we're making our emotions and our thoughts obvious through obvious uses of our voice. Okay, so next one. Keep the energy going. Now, this is going to be this is possibly a controversial interpretation of this for a reason I'll get into in a minute. So our point is that concentration is harder in video meetings, which I think it is. So try and avoid unplanned drops in energy, such as, for example, I've lost a document, clicking around trying to find it, because the minute you spend doing that, someone's browsing another window, someone's attention has gone off, and it's hard to get it back. Keep a steady tempo, a steady speed, and consider moving questions to the end of your section instead of being interrupted if they're not key to the purpose of the session. This is the point that might or might not work for you. So for this webinar, the questions are going to be at the end for exactly this purpose. We'd like to keep the energy going. We don't want there to be a big drop in the middle. They're hard to recover from in terms of energy and energy levels. There's some types of meetings where questions are completely essential and it's the whole purpose of the meeting. So don't just apply this rule and say, oh, but it's better without questions or questions at the end. It really needs you to determine what type of meeting it is, and if you need to have those interruptions, and find a way of going through them as smoothly as possible and keeping the energy there. So if the energy does drop off, you try and pick it up again quickly. Pick it up with your tempo, with your enthusiasm. Typically, it's easier to do this if video is switched on. If there's a face in front of you moving around, it's easier. Right now, you're probably seeing a gallery of our faces on the right or the top, and you're probably seeing the shared screen as most of the screen. This is actually easier to do if it's a whole size face. So there's a whole art, if you will. If you're doing a very important presentation, you might have one person just switching between share screen back to full size video, because actually your full size video is a better way of doing this. It's a better way of keeping the energy. In this case, we're not doing it. I'm relying on the fact that you can see the screen and we're talking through these points anyway. But you might consider more of your face in your video and less of the shared screen, depending on the context. So the final point on that would be that it's probably better to plan your breaks or your downtimes or your questions and put them in the time window. Let's have 5 minutes there. Let's have a 7-minute break here. Everyone goes to it. We come back, because it's less tiring to restart when it's all been arranged. It's when you have unexpected drops and it comes on, it comes off, you go away to do something, something happens. Those sort of things really pull the energy out of a meeting, and they make it harder to keep your focus and keep concentration. And again, there's so many things that add up to the concentration factor that makes this Zoom so tiring. So we're just trying to find the easiest way of doing it. So Leon's about to give us his thoughts on the easiest way of doing it and upon keeping energy.
It took me a while to realize that some of the rules that you've learned, we have learned all our professional lives, they don't actually apply in an online. So one of the things that I've been taught, I think you've probably been taught as well, that when you present, stay with one presenter, because you're actually disruptive in a physical room. Like if I were to co-present with Richard, so Richard will stand up, sit down, I stand up, sit down, and switch in place and all that.
Yeah, we've done it, but we've done some training like that, but we've done it deliberately for certain effects. But as a general rule, it's not a good idea.
Yeah, and it's interesting the fact that for an online situation, sometimes it works better by switching, because it's actually the instantaneous switch. There's no disruption. So really, the interesting thing is actually it's more like a stage planned, a performance closer to actually a meeting. Don't think of it as actually as a meeting, because I think subconsciously we're almost like watching Netflix. I don't know whether you are now. You are actually watching a television, right?
Is it good?
Well, I'm not going to go there, but there's actually another interesting thing I tried before, that when you really have to have a break, watch all the Netflix and all the tricks and all the episodes. They kind of like it. They always do a cliffhanger. So I did a piece of work online, and just before the break, I got a share a piece of research. I put a question, but then I stopped and said, let's have a break, and I'll tell the result when you come back. So everybody, and obviously everybody turned up back on time, because you have a cliffhanger. And this is something that you have to plan. And the more that you think about it as a show, a stage, I'm probably going to be on the right line. And again, there's always a feeling that, why am I doing this? This looks a bit over the top. I think if you feel that, you're probably on the right track.
Yes.
All right, Richard, next one.
Okay, that point there actually feeds smoothly into this one. Number 4, speak as if you're on a phone call, not a face-to-face meeting. So what does that mean? It's the thing where with a microphone, speaking at the same time just doesn't work. You both hear each other's noise, full volume. So in real conversations, we very quickly recognize that's happening, and one person pulls it back. And in an audio call, in a video meeting, that's much slower. So it's no good talking over each other. So microphones have that effect and exaggerate that effect. So treat the meeting as if you're talking on the phone to someone, and your behavior when you're talking on the phone, even with video switched on, is about making it obvious when you are handing over the conversation at the end of a sentence to get a natural flow. So that would be you exaggerate the full stop at the end of the sentence. So the example on the right there, like, hi, how are you? And then that's enough of a space for the other person to realize that this is the time to step in. And it's a bit of an instinctive thing on the phone because we've been doing it for years on the phone, and it's something which we haven't got the hang of instinctively doing on video calls yet, because we're still using our eyes to see and we're still looking at the other person's mouth, and our brains haven't switched over to that mode. So this is all about establishing the cadence, the rhythm for speaking. And then if you're presenting with colleagues, as Leon and I are doing here right now, take a little more time than normal. You prep them, you ask them a question by name. So, I'll always give Leon a few seconds. I'll say, so Leon, what do you think of blah, 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 blah. And Leon's got enough time to realize when he's coming in. I don't just drop him in it and land him in the conversation. And that's part of this effect. This is, it's an obvious wind down of what I finished saying. Now over to you. The example I've got here, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this from the IT angle beside the area I've already spoken on. And you're just explicitly inviting the next bit of the conversation. And it helps people. And maybe they don't even realize you're doing it, but they find it easier to talk to you because it's obvious when they're supposed to talk. So, Leon, what's your thoughts on this as an example? There we go.
Here we go. So just on that one, there's a trick. I think Richard and I can agree beforehand that just before you hand over to your colleague, you will say something like, in a minute, I'm going to ask Richard to come on and tell us about A, B, C, D, and E. And then I'll continue for a bit to allow Richard to give what the heck he's going to say next. Right? So that is a kind of trick or rule that we agreed on. And I think you can actually agree on with your team if you're presenting as a team. There are a couple of thoughts on here as well. And build on what Richard has said, I think it's a phone call. I think there is interesting about whether, to what extent that you want to facilitate a phone call. Yeah, what I mean is, in a meeting, typically you don't have a facilitator. You have a chairman, you have somebody who, quite a number of people who participate, and then you might have a secretary take notes and so on. I think it's actually quite interesting if you actually go on to an online meeting, whether the chairman should be the facilitator or not. Because my experience is the chairperson will actually need to listen to the content intently and understand and perhaps respond to the content, while that person probably can't do and watch 10, 20, whatever people on the call, how they're reacting. And you got a neutral person to facilitate, that actually have a much better chance of coordinating. That facilitator could become using a stage metaphor, the narrator, and they become a neutral and direct the traffic. Now, it's more expensive because you involve more people. However, but I think that is actually something that you might want to look into, apart from looking at arranging and organizing a meeting, just a meeting. It becomes very much a facilitated session. I think those kind of verbal clue is a skill that everybody needs to learn. And I think by now that we have been into the COVID situation, we're working from home for some time. Some lucky ones have learned how to do that. There are others who are still kind of struggling or not really quite understand the rules. And it makes a significant difference to how effective you're going to be. And I think that's the point that we are trying to make, that if you begin to understand, I hope that we can have spend a bit more time to talk to you about your experience, what you picked up, what would be practical. So I think that's what was in my mind. I think here very much recurring in my mind is kind of facilitation. Maybe something that we can talk more in the future, Richard.
Yes, so Leon was part of Igniter's ACMP session, was it early last year?
Yeah, it was.
And that was expertly facilitated. It was so well facilitated that most of the audience probably wouldn't even have noticed it was being facilitated by one of the panel members, but they just did a absolutely world-class job of just every time, it's a conversation about the lull of energy. Every time someone finishes off and no one's quite sure who goes next, this guy stepped in and he very smoothly wrapped it up and then handed it over to the next person, and he just kept the thing going. You know, I'm just thinking of I'm thinking of Scrum meetings and your Scrum Master just making sure that the rhythm and the speed keeps on going. And it's not about telling people what to do, but it's about making sure that they go for the actions and they get to have their say in it. And there's an argument that says you might want to consider having a facilitator in the video meetings amongst your team, whether it's official or not, whether even people know it's happening. You might just take on this role yourself and acknowledge that it's harder to work this way, and therefore you can help by doing the handover. By someone finishes off and you say, thank you, well, that's really good, I thought this was good, I'm just going to ask Bob next what Bob thinks about it, but I just want to finish off by saying that was really interesting. So Bob, what's your thoughts on this? And you're very much enabling people who might not be able to read the cues themselves as easily as naturally. And again, I think it harkens back to what Leon says. It's a combination of facilitation, even though it's not a meeting that you think is being facilitated, and stagecraft. It's, you know, your natural performers are people who are just going to step into these roles without even noticing they're doing it. But we're not all natural performers. And that means you might need to have people help on this, because, you know, you've got some incredibly important people who need to say important things in your team. And unless someone brings them and invites them in, they might find it quite awkward to do this in the video context. And again, I think Leon would agree that's probably something where there's cultural differences in terms of speaking up and being on the camera and being the center of attention, and trying to, you know, some people who are naturally step into it, some people who would naturally try and shy away from it, and just about getting what you need from the lesson. So Leon, do you have anything else to add on top of that?
Yeah, I just remember that slightly funny story as well. I was working for multinational companies, and they have something similar to a conference call, and because of multinationals and they're different nationalities, and language was really a problem, because you can't really quite hear, or you're not used to the rhythm or the intonation of others speaking in English. So I got this French colleagues, and he'd always play this. I didn't really like initially. I thought he was real, and I realized he was just using it. Every now and then he would say, "Oh, excuse me, my English is not my first language, and the line was very bad. Would you mind repeating what you just said?" Because he knew that nobody in the meeting would have heard what the other guys are saying. So he actually he kind of played the fool, and he obviously knew. But I think that would be, I mean, again, kind of play on to add on to what Richard's saying, that you probably need somebody who prepared to be the enabler to make it happen, and without really necessarily embarrassing other people, and keep it going. And people will remember, people will actually appreciate, well, hopefully they will, the effort that you put in.
Okay, thank you, Leon. So again, he's quite almost by accident or design. The point about the bad communication, not being able to hear it, we go into know your tools. So we've been talking on techniques, very much the art of facilitation, performance, and deliberate structuring. And now we're going to go straight over to the opposite side into very ordinary, mundane things that just have to work. And if they don't work, you're in trouble. So, I mean, this is going to sound really obvious, but it makes such a big difference. Know your display settings for your video meetings and make a choice about how the meeting looks, rather than use a default that might not be helping you. So the slide, we can see, do you want to be the face on screen? Everyone can see you. Maybe you're talking for 10 minutes. Maybe you want you in a room. Maybe there's a whiteboard behind you and you're pointing to the whiteboard. That's fine. If that's what you want, then don't accidentally find yourself in the format we're in right now, which is one where you've got the slideshow on and faces at the side. Because if you're trying to do that and you're relying on pointing at stuff and your face is a tiny little box on someone's window, it's not going to work. And that's something which you can work out in advance and know about. So this is the due diligence of working in this format. So know how you look and how you sound in advance. Test your equipment if you have to. If your microphone isn't very good, see if you can get a better one, or practice or work out how loudly you have to speak. Work out if you have to hold it right in front of your mouth. If you need, just to make sure you understand what people are going to get from it. Also, Zoom and Teams, they have breakout rooms. Breakout rooms, I've seen them used really well. You can split up into smaller groups and have real dialogue. I've done networking sessions where I've turned up and 50 or 60 of us have sat in the lobby, and then one person sends us all into breakout rooms. There's 4 people in each, and you have actually what feels like a genuine networking session, which feels incredibly hard to do with 50 people in front of you. But when there's 4 people, you've actually got 7 or 8 minutes, a couple of people, you have time. You have time to do some networking, you have time to have some conversations or catch up, and it feels a little more human. And this is about our initial reaction to working from home last year was sort of, we've got to do this because we've got no other choice. We have to put up with it. Well, now we're talking about, look, we might as well optimize it because it's not going away anytime soon. And even if things improve very quickly over the next 6 or 8 months, a lot of what we've learned to do this year is going to be carrying on for the rest of our working careers, probably, because there's availability of remote meetings has become more and more popular. So these aren't wasted things. So if you are going to use breakout rooms, they're a great technique, but you just have to be able to manage it. So practice it, go there, practice it, have some people log in, practice moving them between the rooms, because it's about the energy conversation. Because if you suddenly do something you've never done before, hang on, let me just fiddle with my Zoom settings, 3 minutes of silence and you've lost your audience. And then do a practice run. Always do a practice run. Do a practice run with everything. Look at the lighting. Is that I've got no hair, so I've got to be very careful about having big, bright, shiny lights on top of my head because it looks bad. Sometimes people set up the lighting and the windows open. It's nighttime and the meeting goes dark, and they didn't think to turn the lights on in the right place. Practical things, and when it matters, they need to be done. And they can make a big difference, and often they don't matter. So maybe it's a casual meeting with your colleagues and it doesn't matter that much, but if it's meetings with your clients, if it's difficult vendors, if it's key stakeholders, then it does matter. So Leon, I'm sure you've had some experience of some of these things that have gone wrong and got some lessons about yourself.
I have to say, one of the things that I really still struggle, and I think something to really watch out, is when you share documents. This is can get very, very disruptive, because you might have, I don't know, a meeting with 5 or 6 presenters, and they each take turn to take control, and it's absolutely chaotic and could be chaotic. And Teams and Zooms and all that, you really need to check out when you share the document, how does the screen going to look like? Are you sharing your desktop? If you're sharing desktop, you might not want people to see certain things, and that becomes kind of maybe so obvious. I got colleagues who actually tend to share desktop and things on there that you probably would never wanted people to see, and this is just obvious. But however, when you not think about it beforehand, that could become a problem. Breakout room is another interesting one. Teams facility to have breakout room as a latecomer. I mean, Zoom have that for a long time, but the thing that I think you need to watch out is when you switch from the main room to the breakout rooms and back into the main room. You need to think about the timing. And if you're going to do workshop, we could create a lot of confusion. If you control it centrally, then everybody need to exit the breakout room at the same time. Is that what you want? Or you want them to have slightly different pace and watching? So the variety of stuff in here. I think breakout room is another art to master. And I think it's just getting practice and just getting ready for it. Testing your equipment and all the jokes on online YouTube about people interrupting you. It still happen. When you're doing online.
And it's about being deliberate. So it's about saying, you're not stuck with the defaults, and just make it be a choice. And if your choice is that those are fine because they suit you, that's fine. But if you're missing out on something, if you're lacking something because you didn't take the time to set it up and it could have been easily set up, then that's an easy fix. And we might have sort of resented the idea that we had to do it because this isn't the way we like to work, and I like to do things face to face. But hopefully we've learned by now that this has gone on for so long that we are going to be stuck with a lot of this, and this is learning to live with it. So one of the other things I've done is I've done online requirement sessions and things where I've had a window open. I've been talking to people remotely. I've been creating post-it notes online. There's some great tools like Miro and things that allow you to do that. But it takes a little practice to get used to screen sharing and doing that at the same time. And then someone wants to share a document, and hang on, is the video on me? Is it on that? And suddenly you leave the video on your desktop background. And Leon and I have both been in a presentation where someone had a load of pirated movies on their desktop and they were just sitting there showing them off. There's lots of just awkwardness, and it just disrupts the flow. So whatever it is that you think you need to be able to do smoothly, just practice it. And well worth getting yourself just a decent webcam, nothing too expensive, a decent microphone that does the job.
Yeah.
So it kind of sounds like it's obvious, but because it's obvious, it's one of those things that, it's a bad one to miss because it wouldn't have taken that much of your time to learn how to make it work.
Yeah, I think it's also the level of sophistication that you want to get. So for example, you want to do a very workshop type. I mean, Richard and I worked on a model that talked about the level of interaction that you have and the level of structuredness, but that's another topic for another time. But if you actually want to share a document using Teams or Zoom and everybody working on the same whiteboard or PowerPoint, and that's another interesting challenge because you're all editing at the same time. And technologically, Teams will allow you to do that, but you need careful management and explanation. A lot of people get confused. Whose screen am I looking at, and who is sharing? And am I looking at my screen, looking at your screen? And workshop in that nature will become challenging. But the impact is significant because you can get things done so quickly. One of the things might sound so mundane. I've been consultant and change manager for a very, very long time. One of the things that always a problem for me is booking a room, finding a room for people to get into a meeting. Now you don't have that constraint. So you actually have a lot of advantage if you're able to do it online. So have to do it well, then I think you can turn the situation that we find ourselves in to your advantage.
And I think that people have stopped holding some types of meetings since they went online because they looked like they were more difficult. And it's the breakout rooms and the networking is a good example that people have stopped trying to network because, if I can't network face to face, well, Zoom's not very easy, but, there are ways that you can try and do it. And if you've got to the point where actually there's a couple of types of meetings with groups of people that it would be very useful to hold, but maybe you're a bit, it can be intimidating, the technical work. Well, by now there's countless tutorials on YouTube telling you how to do it and saying, oh, look, you want to know how to share a screen in Zoom at the same time as you do something on a group whiteboard and everyone logs in. Actually, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps done. You watch the video 2 or 3 times. So people have been out there doing this stuff, learning how to make it work and learning how to make it easy. So if you have shelved some of the techniques that you think are normally quite effective, it might be time to reconsider using some of them. Reconsider whether the investment is worth it and whether bringing it back might help you, because the technology is pretty impressive. It's just about learning how to use it and familiarizing yourself so you don't get tripped up by some of the easy to miss things or easy to, sharing documents, sharing screens, handing over this sort of stuff. Okay, so that was into the realm of being mundane with Know Your Tools. Now we go into video meeting fatigue. So, I think everyone's heard about this. Part of Zoom fatigue is the extra concentration we need in this format. So what do you do? Well, if you make yourself obvious, then you're making it easier for other people to understand you. The extra concentration, as we've already touched on, is a result of people not hearing you as well, not being able to see you as well. They have to focus and look and concentrate to work out what you mean. And the more obvious you can make it, the easier it is for them. It's less hassle. So where possible, it's less tiring to just be yourself rather than put in the performance. So we've spoke about performance quite a few times this evening. If you're on a meeting with people you know well, or an environment where you can just switch off the performance mode, kick back and have a regular conversation the way you normally would, that's less tiring. That's easier for you. It's less tiring. You shift into a mode where you think this is familiar, not too bad. But you have to pick and choose where you apply that. So a webinar like this, where many of the audience I'll have never met, isn't particularly the place to do that. But a meeting where you're doing it with your own team of people who you work with maybe is a place to do that. So the more natural you can be, the less tiring it is. So the other point would be plan for breaks and long meetings. So people might say, why do you need a break when you're just sitting there talking to a computer? Well, because it's mentally very tiring. And when I'm mentally tired, my work isn't as good. And it doesn't take a lot to fix that. You know, just a few minutes away from it, grab a quick cup of coffee or something, and you come back fresh. As we spoke earlier, plan them. Plan them, say, look, we'll do 1 hour, 10 minutes, then we'll have an 8-minute break, then we'll come back in there. And as Leon said earlier, leave them with a cliffhanger or have something to think about over the break. But it's better to plan your breaks, have people be less tired. And don't be macho about the idea that just sitting in front of a TV is tiring, because it's mentally tiring because you're not able to take on information like you normally do. Your brain isn't able to process it like it normally does. It's harder work. It is tiring. And when you're tired, you're not going to be at your best. So we can't stop it being more tiring, but we can make it easier for others by being obvious and making sure our microphones are loud enough, making sure they get what the idea is and it's not complicated to understand. And then we can just manage ourselves and take the breaks. So Leon, how's that been going for you?
I think this particular topic about video meeting fatigue, there are actually quite a bit of research done in the last 6 to 12 months. I think initially I kind of intuitively thought, why was I even more tired when I was actually working from home? Then I read quite a few papers and some work, I think from the BBC as well. It's actually some research show is actually people do feel they're more tiring. And one of the advice is interesting is because it's a slightly counterintuitive, the fact that you're on stage. And you know that when you're performing, when you're on stage, the attention and all that would demand your mental capacity. So I kind of have a mixed message now. Every now and then you might consider switching off the video, because voice only is actually less tiring, according to the research. Now, you have to try it for yourself. I think that's why I think a lot of the colleagues I work with, sometimes they decide not to have, they never really want to turn on video. Now, you have to counterbalance the interactiveness, the ability to build relationship against the fact that you're really tired. And you have to then perhaps balance that. Another funny story, maybe worth just sharing, off topic a bit, Richard. There are companies who insist on asking everybody to turn on video, but sometimes they not realize it's now getting very, very rude to not forewarn a female worker that if you use video, because you suddenly ask a female lady, I'm being slightly sexist here, I think it might not go down very well, because people just not ready and they're expecting a phone call. And I think that perhaps an etiquette now, more than anything else, maybe telling people upfront that you actually want a video, so people get ready, because some of them are actually from home, so they have the freedom to choose how would they dress and so on. So maybe something to watch out as well.
Yeah, and I can speak for that. And you have this constant sense of awareness at home. So I'm aware that in the room behind me are my kids, and I've asked them very nicely to be quiet, and they're doing a good job of it so far. But you know, part of me is listening out for those guys in case something kicks up. Part of me is watching my webcam to make sure it doesn't just fall out of place. Part of it's making sure my microphone's okay. You're balancing many things at once. Now, as I mentioned briefly, over a decade ago, I used to be on stage doing a lot of singing, and that was the same effect. It was very much, you're about to go for, 1 hour and 17 minutes, every second of which is under scrutiny. So every second of which was you performing, often having every second actually planned, not even literally to the second. You'd know what you're going to change between this second and that second and that second. And I remember, and it's the same feeling now. It's this feeling that you're under scrutiny when the video is on, and you're performing, and it's tiring. And it's okay for a few minutes, but you're sitting up straight, and you're not trying not to slouch, and you're trying to remember to look at the camera rather than the screen, because then it looks like you're looking into people's eyes, and it's not particularly easy to do. And I think Leon's point on make sure this is agreed with your audience. So I attended an online wedding. So some relatives in Hong Kong were getting married, and we all had a Zoom link. So we logged onto the Zoom, we had the webcam set up, and there were 40 or so other people. And about half the people knew that they were being watched and their video was on. And so they were all sitting up straight and perfect and watching and smiling, and they were dressed up. And the other half apparently had never used Zoom before, and they were just carrying on their normal lives with the video on. And it was hilarious. It was unfortunately distractingly entertaining, and a lot of the people just spent the whole time watching each other rather than watching the actual wedding taking place, because some people were eating food, just like this, with a big fork in front of the camera and spilling it everywhere. Other people were adjusting their clothes. It was crazy. So there's something to be said for make sure people know what they're getting into. This is going to be a video meeting, video switched on, or videos no need to be switched on. Just make it obvious, and it's fine either way, but just give people the notice. Because it does take some effort and some attention, so you just make it easier for people.
But I guess I think the fact we used to do that, we always talk about going to the meeting, going to the session, what is the dress code, and I think it's not dissimilar. So just making it becoming more like etiquette, and you ask and not assuming. Simple stuff, but reapply in the online world.
And make it explicit, because it's quite easy to get into the mode where you sort of dress in smart casual, but hang on, are we going to have a meeting where unexpectedly the senior player is going to be in the room and I need to be dressed up because they want to see what I look like when I go and meet the client? So just call it out. And if you're being invited into something you don't know, then feel free to ask. Because what you don't want to do is get it wrong. Okay. So with that and video meeting fatigue as we head towards the end of the seminar, so I think it's a good point to conclude on. So we're interested in your best lessons learned for remote meetings. So this session has been recorded, and we're going to send it out to quite a few people who've expressed an interest in watching it. So we're interested in what did people learn that helped in remote meetings last year. We'd love to collect and share your own learnings on how to make things work. So for those of you present, if you'd like, can you type into the chat window? And those of you who are watching on a later video recording of this, please feel free to add this as a comment. We'd like to see it in the ACMP Hong Kong LinkedIn. We're just interested. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of very smart professionals, you've all been picking up hints and tips. And we've just covered the ones that occurred to us to speak on a change-related note. So we were interested in performance, especially in structure, because structure is one of the ones that not that many people have necessarily thought about. So what we'd like to do is collect the ideas, and we'll just add them to a post so people can see. And we'll be continuing the 2021 ACMP Hong Kong webinar series next month. We're going to do monthly ones. I think we're going to be doing one on online persuasion and how we are persuasive in an online environment, which takes elements of what we looked at today, but goes into much more detail. And that's all about what's effective and what works and what doesn't work. So look out for details of that soon. So Leon, anything else to add?
I think it's interesting. My point is being radical in the sense that some of the ancient classic techniques haven't really changed. Right? So just a bit of a cliffhanger. We're going to talk about things that perhaps 2,000 years ago when the Greeks are talking about rhetoric. So talking about ethos, pathos, logos, and how you persuade. That's been practiced for years. How would that reapply? How do we reapply them in the online world? That's what we're looking at. And I think it'll be quite an interesting journey. I think we can do different level of detail, and we're hoping to get some feedback. And then we're going to continue really looking at something practical for a community of change and transformation, innovation professionals. What are things that can be useful? So that's the aim. And hopefully we'll see and spread the word. Hopefully you'll be able to join us and perhaps spread the word and more colleagues will be able to join us.